Well, Marikana, the Oscar Pistorius drama, the rape and death of Anine Boyson and the horrific dragging death of a Mozambican taxi driver allegedly at the hands of police. As one pundit has said, we've certainly had our fill of bad news for the year. So what impact has this had on our international image? That informed an in-depth discussion earlier in the week with Obed Bapela, who's Deputy Minister of Performance, Monitoring and Evaluation in the Presidency, along with Nomsa Mazibuko from BrandSA.
Well, definitely we have been having bad news since the beginning of the year. Well, probably starting with Marikana and just continuing. And indeed, it does have a knock effect on our brand positioning in the world. And people are talking to say, what is happening in South Africa? Are we losing control or what? Even though the impact will not be felt now, but if these things continues, unstoppable, and then they continue as they do, people will then begin to take particular positions and view on us as a country. And only if countrymen and women could really understand, South Africans in particular, that the bad news are really damaging
Are those views not starting to be formulated already?
Well, it's quite a difficult environment because people will react emotionally to what they hear or see happening in South Africa. But it is how the country positions itself in terms of repairing on the damage and correcting the things, but also positioning the brand once more to say South Africa is still a best place to. And the President, Jacob Zuma, did well when they went to World Economic Forum recently now, really to appease the international community to say South Africa is still the destination to invest. South Africa is still the place where your tourists are most welcome.
Nomsa Mazibuko, what sort of conversations are you hearing from the global constituency that you interact with?
I think the reality is that there's a feeling that the country has taken a serious knock when it comes to the reputation. So there is that concern that these, the stream of the negative stories that have been going out are now a reflection of our society. But I think one of the most important things that we need to do as Brand South Africa and that we've been doing is that we need to actually tackle these head on, but not forgetting about all the other good that is happening in South Africa currently. Because I think, as I was saying earlier, that bad news makes a lot of good news when it comes to the media and also interest. It makes a story. But I think the most important thing from a BrandSA perspective is not to lose sight of South Africa in terms of the bigger picture, that we are not all about gender violence or, the type of reporting that we've seen in the last couple of weeks.
But the worse the news is, and let's be honest, there's been a lot of it, that tends to eclipse anything good that is coming out of your organization.
It does. However, we've got an opportunity to actually speak to the world, for example, without putting those at the forefront. At the end of this month, if you look at it, we're hosting the BRICS Summit, which is a very important summit that actually showcases the developing world and South Africa's role in it. I do believe that when it comes to issues such as that, when it comes to investors, etc., investors do not look at South Africa as a risky place for their investment. I think that's something that we should never forget. And when we are hosting such important summits, it gives us an opportunity to communicate to the global world and to demonstrate what South Africa is capable of. And as Brand South Africa, that's one of the things that we focus on, because at the end of the day, one negative story eclipses a lot of good. But the challenge here is to always be able to communicate the positive, but also to notice and acknowledge the challenges that you're facing as a country. And that's what we're doing. We're not sitting here pretending that nothing is happening.
Deputy Minister, to what extent does government itself need to manage its own message? A lot of negative headlines, for instance, for the Zuma administration with Minister Lulu Tlingwana and her inopportune remarks about cultural stereotypes and their relationship with women.
Well, look, we are discussing that ministers, we are the face of government. And I think whatever you say, it ought to be within the reputation of our brand as a country.
And a lot of them put their foot in.
And therefore, we have to really also look at refining what they say and in terms of training and then the approach and the messaging. And we have agreed that many voices, yes, but one message. And the message is about positioning South Africa as a country that the world must continuously trust and embrace.
When we see a cover story like the recent one on Time magazine on Oscar Pistorius, that surely reinforces the crime stereotype in this country. What damage does a story like that do to our reputation?
It does a lot of damage that we cannot deny, and it does reinforce the stereotype. But we need to be honest with ourselves and say right now Oscar Pistorius is the story. And that is how these things work. I mean, if you remember years ago, if you look at Diana's death and how that was covered ad nauseum. But, you know, things have changed. We now have Twitter, we now have social media. So there is a lot of negative that goes with it. However, what we need to remember is that that is not the only story that's out there about South Africa. You know, these big stories like the Oscar Pistorius one obviously makes the front covers of Time, of international magazines. But as we all know, this could happen anywhere in this world. It could happen in the United States. We saw the O.J. Simpson trial that took place. It's happened in other countries. So we are aware that it's not a reflection of the country and of the 51.8 million people who live in this country. It's a reflection of, yes, an individual who happens to have a lot of stature, unfortunately, and that it's somebody with that type of celebrity who's done this. But we need to remember that what has happened to Oscar is not reflective of all of us as South Africans, and that us as South Africans have actually looked at it with horror, and we couldn't believe that somebody of that stature could have done something of that nature.
Deputy Minister, do we, or does government, does the country have a brand crisis plan, and are you implementing it?
No, we don't have a crisis in our brand positioning. That's why we have Brand South Africa as an institution that we are supporting and giving all the support and ensuring that South Africans, men and women of stature, are also part of the board of Brand South Africa. And that is why we even remodeled it to say, let's then look at ways of now positioning the country to the rest of the world. The incidences are unavoidable, they'll always be there, but how we then respond to them, I think is very critical. And I'm glad that the president, after the incident of the Mozambican who got killed in Davidton, was immediately the following day able to say to the country, it's horrific, it's barbaric, this should not be allowed to go. And in the swift action by government, by removing the police and now even charging them. So this is how our government ought to respond quicker, faster and smarter to ensure that we give confidence to the people.
Let me put the final question, and spoken like a true government minister, and thank you. let me put the final question to Brand South Africa then. Are you doing anything differently in terms of your core messaging in order to overcome the difficulties that we have been talked about? Have you recalibrated your strategy in any way?
Yes, we've recalibrated our strategy. I think that's important. In reputation, you know, everything's robust and it changes. So you can't say this is my strategy for the year and this is what I'm going to execute. So we've done that. We do have an ongoing strategy where we've got key markets that we focus on and we have continuous messaging that goes in there. But obviously with these challenges that we've got, we've had to relook at our messaging and address the challenges that we're facing when it comes to, you know, the messaging that's going out there. So a lot of that has happened. And I just want to give you examples for, you know, one of the things that was important, especially when it comes to the Pistorius trial that happened, is we obviously track media and we look at the type of issues that are being raised globally. And, you know, it's little things. You might not see them because they might not become headline news. One of the bigger things, for example, was our criminal justice system and its ability to actually manage this challenge. And we are able to actually go back and be proactive with messaging. So we don't always have to react and wait for something to break and then, you know, address it. We have to be extremely proactive in getting the messaging out there and getting people to understand this is our criminal justice system, this is how it works. And by doing that, people were able to understand the process that was going to be taking place rather than to question whether we are able to deliver, you know, on something like this.
I guess the most important thing is that we are discussing it, and it's also important for the rest of the nation to talk about it as well. Folks, thank you very much indeed. And if you have a view on that conversation, certainly in terms of our brand image, the conversation continues on our Facebook page on this address. And coming up on Mags on Media, all the fuss over an ice cream, a dog, a car, and a television commercial.